Welcome. Today we're going to be taking apart a Razer Blade gaming laptop. This one is a 14-inch. It is the Razer RZ09-0102-1102. And to remove this bottom cover, you're going to need a small Torx head bit. This is a T5. So we will go ahead and just remove the bottom case screws. Alright, now that we have the screws removed, we're going to remove this bottom cover and see what's inside. Alright, looks like from this point on we're just going to need a small Phillips head bit, so I'm going to switch to a 2.5. Alright, so we'll just go ahead and start with the Wi-Fi card. I'm just going to pop up on those antennas and just remove the screw. Once it pops up, you can just pull it straight out of the little connector. Alright, so with this type of connector right here, you just kind of pop up that little arm there, and then that will release the ribbon, and it's always a good idea to close it back down so it doesn't get broken. And we can go ahead and remove the screw for the SSD drive, and just like the Wi-Fi card, we can just pull it straight out. Alright, so it looks like the fans and heatsink can also come out. So I'll go ahead and remove the tape and stuff that's holding this in place, and then we can go ahead and remove these fans. So as you can see, the screws have these little black covers on them. They're just rubber, and you just kind of pick them off with your fingernails. And for these little fan connectors, we're going to go ahead and just use a small tool on one side and a fingernail on the other, and just wiggle that connector out. And if they don't leave you a lot of room and you need to just get in there with one tool, just kind of work it back and forth. Pull a little bit on one side, pull a little bit on the other side until you've kind of slowly wiggled that out. It'll help preserve the connector and the wires that are going into it, especially when they're really thin like on this model. Alright, so we got the connectors loose. Now we can go ahead and remove the screws for the fans and remove them. Okay, I'm not sure if that's OEM or not, but there is one screw on this fan that is a smaller bit size than the others. So you're going to need a smaller bit maybe for the outside screw on that other fan. So I just switched to a 1.5 and then I can remove it. Alright, so we can go ahead and also remove the heatsink, and I'm going to do that by just removing or loosening these screws. Yeah, these ones remove, so just take out the screws The order doesn't matter when you're taking them off, but when you are tightening it back down with new thermal paste, it's always a good idea to tighten them down evenly instead of just starting on one side and working your way over. You know, you kind of alternate, like if you're putting on a car tire, that way it'll kind of squish down the thermal paste evenly. They're usually numbered. I mean, this is usually numbered like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, something like that, but not on this model. All right, so the thermal paste can kind of glue this thing in place. So once you verified you have the screws out, you're just going to kind of lift up on one side of that heatsink and give it a wiggle until it pops up, and then you can remove it. All right, so now we can go ahead and I'm going to disconnect all of the little connectors here on the motherboard, because we are going to remove the motherboard and eventually the LCD, so we can just go ahead and unplug all of this stuff. So some connectors you gotta just kind of wiggle out, and some are the type that we showed you earlier that you can kind of just lift up and that will release the ribbon. But most connectors that have the cable type are just going to be a simple kind of wiggle it to pull it out. Right. Looks like the one for the speaker is really tiny. Okay, that is a real pain connector. It's tiny and they don't give you a whole lot of lip to actually grip onto that thing, so you might need to use two really kind of sharp tools to get under there and actually pop that thing out. It's not a very good design. And then for the DC jack, this connector is a lot more robust, so you can actually usually just pull on that to take it out. Alright, so looking from this side, there's no more ribbons. This one is unstuck from the battery, and then we can go ahead and free the other side. So this is the video cable, and there's a small bar that actually flips up. So as you can see, that's what kind of holds the connector in place. So once you flip up the little bar, then it will release the connector. And you can actually use the little bar to pull it free from the motherboard. And then your CMOS or PRAM battery, that can stay put and stay stuck to the motherboard, and that'll always kind of stay with the motherboard and connected. It looks like another tiny connector for the speakers. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and remove the screws for the battery and see if there's just any way of removing that before we try to remove the motherboard. Definitely want to get rid of this tape here. They've taped the battery to the keyboard ribbon, I think that is. for some reason. So yeah, that battery does not feel like it wants to wiggle out just yet. So since that connector is buried underneath the motherboard, we're gonna have to remove the screws for the motherboard and get it worked free before we can remove that connector right there. So we'll just go ahead and remove the other screws covering the hinge. And it does look like one of those is also a small type Phillips. So we're going to switch to our other Phillips bit to remove that one screw. And I guess that is part of the DC jack, the little cover there. So once you have the screws removed, you can remove the DC jack. And then we'll go ahead and repeat for the other side, and these screws are all full size. So we'll switch back to our 2.5 and remove those screws. Alright, so it looks like we're good to remove the motherboard screws now, and it looks like the speakers do have to be removed as well before the motherboard can be taken out, so we'll go ahead and do that. Alright, so now we'll just go ahead and remove those motherboard screws and see if we can't get it disconnected from the battery. Alright, so I kind of missed that earlier. The battery cable was tucked underneath this little fold cable, so it looked to me like the battery was actually connected underneath, but it was just disconnected. Whoever had the laptop before just forgot to connect that back up. So there is a connector at the top of the motherboard, and you might be able to wiggle that battery out without having to remove the motherboard, but just keep in mind that the cable is tucked underneath the little ribbon here, and the battery has to move out laterally because of these little screw tabs here. So it's going to have to go up and over the motherboard if you do plan to remove the battery and replace it by itself. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, that this cable might be a little bit of a problem with the motherboard mounted, but it could be possible. So just in case you need to replace your battery. Alright, so we are down to the palm rest and display assembly. The keyboard, the keyboard looks like it's replaceable, but it is designed kind of like the MacBooks, where it has a very, very, very tiny Phillips head bit, or Phillips head, and there's probably close to like 60, 80 going along the keyboard there. So if it's more cost effective for you, you might consider just buying the palm rest as an assembly instead of trying to replace that keyboard, unless you have a lot of extra time on your hands. All right. And for the touchpad, I'm not seeing any way to dismount it, but there might just be glued on. So with a heat gun, you might be able to replace that touchpad, but those rarely ever go out. All right, so we're ready to separate the display assembly from the palm rest. So we verified that the cables coming from the LCD are no longer connected to anything. So using one hand underneath to support it, we're going to go ahead and remove the 2 remaining hinge screws. So that looks like it for the palm rest. There's a small LED board right there, but for the most part, the palm rest has been completely disassembled. All right, I went and checked into it a little bit more. Apparently these RZ09 screens are a real pain to take apart, just from the fact of how much adhesive they use around the front bezel. So similar to some MacBooks, you're gonna need a heat gun, possibly a couple specialty tools, and a lot of patience to try to separate that bezel and back cover assembly. So if you need to replace your display, I would definitely check into actually buying a complete assembly, because I mean, for the average layman, this thing's just going to be impossible to take apart without breaking something, and it's going to be a lot easier and a lot less headache to just replace it as an assembly. And for this one, we're also going to leave it complete. So that is how you take apart a Razer RZ09-01021102. This is the 14-inch Razer Blade gaming laptop. So if this video helped you or you found it informative, please like and subscribe. Thank you.